Welcome to This Week in Virginia, and a very special welcome to Delegate Jason Ballard, representing the 12th District, part of Montgomery County, Pulaski County, all of Giles County, and also then the part of the city of Radford. So we appreciate your being on. Delegate Ballard, I would say that you're the first of the 18 that I'm looking forward to talking with in the coming weeks. And for our viewers to know what this 18 means, there were 18 new members elected to the House of Delegates in this past election. 17 in the regular election, then one in the special election. So one of 18, and we appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. A Bachelor of Science degree in Political Science from Concord College, and then West Virginia University Law School graduate, and also the Judge Advocate General's School with your additional law work that you've done. And Delegate Ballard, I think what I would want to start off on is to let the viewers know that you served for 4 years on the town council in Parisburg, your hometown, your native, I would say, hometown. And I would like for you to talk a little bit about the contrast, comparison, or how did serving on the town council lead to your deciding to run for the House of Delegates?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I appreciate you, first of all, asking me to be on the program. It's an honor to be here. So I look forward to our chat. So I actually, out of law school, I joined the military, as you mentioned. And so I served 12 years on active duty in the Army as a judge advocate. I deployed 4 times to the Middle East. And when I left active duty, I moved back to Parisburg, where I was born, and I was appointed to town council. And so served there for 4 years and just really enjoyed it, being a part of my hometown and seeing how I could help out our citizens. It was just such a joy. And the big difference is that I joke, we agree on almost everything on town council. It's a very little to fight about, very few contentious issues. And that's quite the contrast from being in the General Assembly, where it seems like there's robust debate and spirited discussion about almost every issue. And so that would be the main thing I would say, is that it's a little more adversarial in the General Assembly than it is on town council, but it's basically the same structure. At the end of the day, we're a diverse group of individuals that come from all over Virginia and come together to try to help out our citizens.
You know, the interesting part that you mentioned is how in town councils and city councils and even boards of supervisors, so often it is much more collegial, and there's not that contrasting viewpoints that leads to real problems. It's sad to read about occasionally people resigning from town councils in different parts of the Commonwealth because things get a little too toxic, and I'm glad that that was not your experience in Parisburg. If it had been your experience, you might not have wanted to run for the House of Delegates at all.
I had a great experience on town council. I was surrounded by just a wonderful group of colleagues, and we all had a shared vision of how we wanted to help out Parisburg. So it was actually enjoyable. And quite frankly, the only reason why I decided to even run for the House of Delegates is just based on my predecessor who represented our area. And I didn't feel like that individual did a very good job. And so after a lot of convincing, they convinced me to run for House of Delegates. And so here I am. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, thinking about the 12th District and the numbers change, tell us a little bit about how will the district change that you represent? I'm sure it'll still include all of Giles County. Which direction does it move? Where will you be picking up new constituents?
So as you mentioned earlier, the 12th District, as it's currently labeled, is all of Giles County, the city of Radford, parts of Montgomery County, which is really just Blacksburg and Virginia Tech, and then a little bit of Pulaski County. With the redistricting based on the census that came out, we're going to be relabeled the new 42nd District, and it will still include all of Giles County. It'll still include the city of Radford. I pick up half of Pulaski County. Instead of just a little sliver, I get now half of Pulaski County, and I lose Blacksburg. So what was basically a toss-up district from Democrat to Republican is now a pretty heavily leaning Republican district in the new 42nd.
Those districts in the western part of the state and the southern part of the state certainly all had to pick up more land mass and more citizens. So yours moved a little more westward in a way than, as you said, away from Blacksburg. Tell us about your committee assignments. Looks like from looking at them, the speaker gave you some good committees to serve on. Certainly the courts committee is sort of a plum for a freshman legislator, but also your other two committees. So how did you find the committee work?
So when the speaker sent out a request for us to put in our preferences for committees, I kind of tapped into my military experience, and I said, Mr. Speaker, I'll serve at the pleasure of you and what you think is best for me in order to help out the greater good. And so I didn't really have specific requests, but I did point out that being a trial lawyer for almost 20 years, being a military officer for over 17 years. And then, of course, as we discussed earlier, my Pearisburg Town Council experience, I felt that courts, public safety, and county, cities, and towns were the three committees that best kind of harnessed my prior experience. And so I was appointed to the courts committee, as you mentioned, and it's a really robust committee with a lot of heavy lifting. A lot of very challenging bills come through courts. So I really enjoy that. There are a lot of lawyers on that committee as well. So we have a spirited debate. And then with the public safety committee, chaired by Tony Wilt, there's a lot of gun measures that come through there, a lot of law enforcement issues. I'm a champion of supporting our brave men and women in uniform. So I enjoy that committee. And then county, cities, and towns, where I spent on the town council, it kind of made sense to me. And so I enjoy being on that committee as well. It's the lifting isn't quite as heavy as the other committees, but we do a lot of charter work. Do a lot of things that directly impact our localities at the very lowest level.
If the viewers haven't seen the story that Marcus Schmidt wrote about you in the Cardinal News, it's available if they go on Cardinal News and look it up. Certainly an excellent piece that he wrote about you. And one of the headlines, a quote from you, was, "I try to be more deliberate." And even before I read the entire story back in the middle of February when he wrote it, explain that a little bit about what you meant as you talked with him about you try to be more deliberate.
So I really came into my freshman year with trying to learn as much as I possibly could about the overall process. Now, again, as a lawyer going on 2 decades, I certainly understand how laws are made, but it's more than that when you're in the General Assembly. And it's about building relationships and having some coalition in order to get things done. And so my entire goal going into it was to evaluate everyone's position, to learn as much as I could about not only my colleagues on the Republican side, but my colleagues across the aisle with the Democrats. And I try to keep an open mind about every piece of legislation and then make a decision about what's best for my district. What I meant by saying I try to be more deliberate is, instead of putting in 20, 30 bills that may have an impact on a campaign, and that are talking points for a campaign, to say, hey, I put in this legislation and it was shot down. I tried to look at the overall big picture and think, what could I do that, number one, has a likelihood of actually passing? And then number two, what is going to directly impact my district? And so that's really what I meant, because a lot of the overarching social issues and some of the more divisive issues in the General Assembly were certainly covered by other legislators. And so I didn't feel like I necessarily had to put in my own piece of legislation for the the 25th gun bill or the 25th abortion bill, because it was already being covered. And so I just tried to focus on what was best to help out my district.
I like the expression, and I certainly understand your explanation of it entirely. And over the years, I've heard people say, well, that's a brochure bill. That's a brochure bill. And as I look at the 8 bills that you introduced, as you said, they were not necessarily brochure bills, but they were important bills. And the one that has the lowest number might have been the first one that you dropped in, House Bill 405, is one I'd really like you to talk about a bit, because it's one the governor's already signed. We're having a conversation on the 11th of April. We'll tell our viewers. They may be seeing it later in the week. But at midnight tonight, the governor's got to act on all the bills that are before him. But he didn't wait with regards to House Bill 405 having to do with business parks. And it seems like a bill that probably should have been introduced and passed years before you came to the General Assembly. But it will be law July 1. So let me stop talking and tell us something about that bill.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I think that really became my crowning achievement, if you will, for this session. It's basically a bill that allows transmission lines to go ahead and be built into these business parks. And that is definitely something that directly impacts our district as we look to increase economic growth in Southwest Virginia. We have to have ready-made facilities for businesses to come in and put their structure into place. And so what 405 does is it allows companies like Appalachian Power to go ahead and just build those lines into the parks. And that way, when a business looks to expand opportunities, they can look and say, well, wait a second, Pulaski County, for example, they already have a business park. It's ready to go. All they have to do is move their equipment in and start working. And so I was really happy to see that bill had wide bipartisan support. It really was not a controversial bill. It sailed through the House. And then when I went over to Senate to present it into their committee, we actually added on a location a little bit south of Richmond to add another business park there. And so the Democrats embraced it, and it sailed through the Senate. And thankfully, the governor signed it into law, and we can actually see some good things put into place now with that legislation.
And if I read the bill correctly, it applies particularly to those areas that have received a federal designation. And so that so it wouldn't necessarily, if someone's watching this in some other part of the Commonwealth, it doesn't necessarily apply to all business parks, correct?
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, it's looking to expand opportunities into areas that actually need some economic growth.
Right.
And so again, in Southwest Virginia, we're prime and we're ready for that economic growth. And so that's really what it's targeting.
Now, what about some of your other bills? I know that as I looked over them, it seems like those fiscal impact statements that come along that really sometimes challenge getting bills passed in 1 year, in one session. But pick any of the other 7 that you would like, Delegate Ballard, and tell us about those bills.
Well, to be just completely candid with you, some of the bills I drafted and put in for drafting was to just experience the process. For example, the veterans bill, where it would waive admission fees in our parks. Number one, I think that's needed. So I put it in to see how legislative services was drafted. And then I put it in just to see if it would get any legs through the General Assembly. As you mentioned, the fiscal impact statement came back. It was quite significant on that particular bill. And so it really didn't go anywhere. And that, along with, I think there were a few other legislators. Delegate Will Wampler had a very similar bill. There was at least a legislator on the other side of the aisle that had a similar bill to waive fees or some type of fee shifting arrangement for our veterans. And they just didn't go anywhere because of the impact it would hit on our revenue. And so that was one of the bills that, I put it in and see where it went, and it didn't go very far. So maybe another time. Some of the other bills, as you know, legislators can get bills in a variety of ways. One, you can have an idea of your own and put it in for drafting and see what happens. You can have a constituent request that you put in a particular piece of legislation because it's something that they want. Or you can have various organizations come to you and say, hey, we have this piece of legislation, we would like you to carry the bill. And so that was the case with a couple of my bills. Individuals or organizations had asked me to put it in for drafting, and so I did. But they didn't really go very far. The only other one besides the business park bill was kind of a lawyer bill, as people describe it. It was a promise not to plead the statute of limitations. Probably pretty boring for most of your viewers, unless you're a trial lawyer. So that was the other bill that got through for me.
Yeah, so I'm sure the trial lawyers and others have looked up House Bill 409, and they're probably glad that bill also has been signed by the governor. Thinking about veterans for just a moment, I think it was maybe in the news over the weekend that with regards to retirement income from veterans, that Virginia finds itself coupled with only 2 other states that I guess that fully tax veterans' retirement benefits. And the states of California and Vermont, I love people in both those states. I've been in both those states, but they're not usually states that Virginia is aligned with as far as policy. So it looks like there's another issue waiting to be addressed at some point in time.
Right. That was the bill, I believe, that was sponsored by my seatmate, Delegate John McGuire. John was a Navy SEAL, just a great individual, great American, and he wanted to exempt, I believe, up to $40,000, the first $40,000 of veteran retirement pay. And it's now hung up in conference. And I'll be honest with you, I don't understand why it's even an issue. I mean, we in Virginia, we should want to keep and retain our veterans. And so, Virginia's home, I think, to the largest group of veterans in the country. And what you'll see if you go down to North Carolina, where they have Fort Bragg and a bunch of other bases, it says the most veteran-friendly state in America. And as our governor has said many times, we want to remove that sign and we want to bring it to Virginia. We want to have Virginia as the most veteran-friendly state in America. And so, candidly, I really don't understand why that legislation hasn't been advanced forward. It's something that we need. When we have all these veterans, especially in Eastern Virginia, around all the military bases, their Army, Navy bases, Coast Guard bases, Marine bases, they retire and they want to start another career. But if they're looking at having their retirement taxed immediately, what incentive do they have to stay in Virginia? Why wouldn't they go to a place like Florida or North Carolina? So, I was a big supporter of that bill. I'm a big supporter of all our veterans bills, but that's one that we need to get passed, and the governor needs to sign into law.
I'm thinking I'm hearing correctly in my memory that even our previous governor, who was a veteran, was in support of that, and we'll see what happens. Like you say, it's still in process. It's still in the special session, and no doubt it's the fiscal impact that they're wrestling with even as they prepare the budget. Delegate Ballard, early on when I asked you about committees, you said you tapped back into your military experience and the way you told the speaker wherever you thought you'd best be assigned. Talk a little bit, if you will, about the breadth of the military experience that you've had. You're still in the reserves. Lieutenant Colonel, I believe, would be your rank. I should address you that way instead of delegate. But I think that there are not as many legislators now as there were a decade ago, 2 decades ago, and certainly following Second World War and Korean War and Vietnam War as there once were in the General Assembly of Virginia. But how did your military experience how does it affected much of your life and your career? For people who want to see all the honors that you've received and the places you've served, just go on your website. It's there. But reflect on it, if you would, for us.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I'm a proud veteran. As you mentioned, I currently serve. I'm in the Army Reserves. I think Dan Helmner and I are the only two, at least in the House, and it may be in the entire General Assembly, that are actively serving our military. We have several veterans, but Dan and I are actually current Army drilling reservists. What happened was, when I was in law school at WVU, my first year, I was going to contracts class, and the news came on that airplanes had hit, the first tower. And so, we watched as that happened, and it impacted me deeply. And I decided that I wanted to do something besides just being a kind of a regular lawyer. I wanted to do something in the military to serve our country in response to that attack on our soil, but also, harness my training that I had gone through as a law student. And so I started to apply to the Army JAG Corps. I applied to all the branches, but I eventually got into the Army. And my first assignment was at the 10th Mountain Division, which is a light infantry division based out of Fort Drum, New York. And I think within 6 or 7 months of arriving there, I was packing my bags to go to Afghanistan on my first deployment. And so I went over there. I served. My boss was Colonel James Garrett, just a wonderful man, mentor to this day. And he helped me get through my first deployment, where I was what we would call an operational law attorney. And so I traveled the country in Afghanistan, inspecting our field detention sites, inspecting our theater internment facility with the International Committee of the Red Cross, to make sure that we were treating our detainees humanely and in accordance with international law. And I did some investigation as well. And so I had a pretty robust experience in Afghanistan, and I came back to Fort Drum, and within less than a year, I was packing my bags to go to Baghdad, Iraq, again with the 10th Mountain Division. And so when I was there, my job was the chief prosecutor for all of Baghdad, and that's what I did for the military for a year in Baghdad. And I was there with Major General Michael Oates. He was the commander of the 10th Mountain Division. And that was an interesting deployment. We had, I think, one of the highest rates of suicide within the 10th Mountain Division in all their history. And again, that was something that impacted me deeply. And I saw how our veterans suffer with post-traumatic stress and combat-related injuries and illnesses. And so I eventually was transferred from 10th Mountain Division. I served at Fort Knox. I was at the JAG School. I was the first commander, lawyer commander within about 200 years in the JAG Corps. And so I did that. Lieutenant General Dana Chipman asked me to do that. And it was an interesting experience that I got to actually lead troops. And then I was selected by the Judge Advocate General of the Army to go to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Command. Most people know that unit as the Night Stalkers from various things, Mogadishu, Bin Laden raid, other special operation missions throughout our history. And so I was their lawyer for 2 years, and I did 2 more deployments with the Night Stalkers. And it was, again, quite the interesting experience. And so, at the end of the day, all of that is just about public service, and it's about giving back to our nation and helping the American people. And so I think being a legislator is very similar. You're just trying to help out your community and the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so that's how I approach it. I don't come in necessarily with any goals or objectives for my personal life. I just want to help out. And if I'm doing a good job, I think people will continue to elect me. And hopefully that's what I can do. But I just really enjoy serving and being a public servant.
Well, it certainly all connects, and I thank you for reflecting on that time in active duty service, and glad that at least 2 of you in the House of Delegates are still in the active reserves as well. It's 2 questions. What's been your biggest surprise in your first year in the General Assembly? And if you could fix one thing, what would you say that you given one wish, one fix, what would you fix about the General Assembly process? So what do you think?
Those are good questions. So I'll answer my biggest surprise. And I've said this before. I think my biggest surprise was just the amount of time involved in being a legislator, being a delegate. We all have heard that it's a part-time legislature. It's a citizen legislature, and that's certainly true. And I'm glad it is that way. I wouldn't want it to be full-time. But I don't think I truly appreciated just how busy we are when we are in Richmond in the General Assembly session. I mean, mornings start for a lot of people at 5:36 in the morning, and maybe you'll have a prayer breakfast, maybe you'll have a Bible study early in the morning, and then committees will start at 8 a.m. And I'm based on my military training. I like to be prepared for every meeting, and I like to be early. People often joke that I'm the first one in the room because 15 minutes early is on time. So right. I'm always there early, and that requires you to start your day pretty early. And it goes late into the evenings with various functions. And so I was just really surprised of how many hours are involved on a daily basis. And when the General Assembly regular session concluded, I'll be honest with you, I was exhausted because I spent a lot of time not only just actually doing the work of the people, but trying to meet as many people as I possibly could and build those relationships and form those coalitions so I could be a more effective legislator. So that's the biggest surprise, is just the time involved. If I could fix one thing, I think it would be, and this is a great question, I've never really thought about it, but since you put me on the spot, I think if I could fix one thing, it would be changing the committee makeup in the Senate. And so what I mean by that is in the House, committees, Courts Committee, for example, will have 22 members. It'll be the party that's in control. So the Republicans will have 12 Republicans and we'll have 10 Democrats. So it's not separated by party affiliation that much. And if you're trying to advance a particular piece of legislation, you may only need to sway two minds in order to get it passed, or depending on who's president. In the Senate, they have these supermajorities. And so you go in there to their committees, and you're not just convincing two people to come to your side if it's some type of party line vote, but you're convincing a lot of people. And so if I could switch that and just make it very similar to what the House is, I think it would be more advantageous to get your legislation passed because it's tough when you go into the Senate as a Republican and the Democrats are in charge. It's real easy to kill bills over there because they have supermajorities.
Delegate Ballard, thank you for both of those answers. And on the one I bet you would change, I think that you would be joined by practically every member in the House who has experienced that. But Delegate Jason Ballard, thank you so much for being on This Week in Virginia, and thank you for taking the time today. We'll see you back here in Richmond as the budget and 40 some other bills also will be completed. And thank you for your service throughout the years and now your service in the General Assembly, and we look forward to seeing you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation, and it's a pleasure to serve, and so hopefully I can continue to do so for years to come.
Thank you, sir.